What's up guys, it's your girl Antoinette back with another video. In today's video we're going to be talking about everything wrong with Charmed. Not that fake new one that everybody's been talking about. We're going to be talking about the OG with the original sisters, Prue, Piper, Phoebe, and eventually Paige. And I've been wanting to talk about that for a hot minute, so let's go right ahead into the video. So a little backstory, if you don't know what Charmed is, it's a show that premiered I think in 1996, it could be 1997, in the 90s, starring three sisters who were Prue, which was the older sister. She was played by Shannon Doherty. Piper, played by Halliwell, and Alyssa Milano played Phoebe. So if you have never watched the original Charmed, I really advise that you should. It is a show about three sister witches who are starred by three actually really popular 90s actresses. So you have Prue, the older sister, who's played by Shannon Doherty, and she also starred in Beverly Hills 90210. You have Holly Marie Combs playing Piper, and she also starred in Picket Fences. Then Alyssa Milano, I feel like everybody knows her now because of her politics and everything, but she did play Phoebe, which is kind of like, I think she kind of rocked the show, but that's neither here or there because I'm not talking about that. But it is about three sisters who find out that they're witches, and I'm here to tell you everything that was problematic about it, so we can go ahead and get right into that. So I have my handy dandy notebook, which is my phone, where I basically have been keeping notes for a couple of weeks to actually find things to talk about. So I decided we should talk about each individual character first, starting with the older sister, of course, who is Prue. So Prudence, or Prue Halliwell, she's the older sister, and there were quite a few things problematic about her. They always painted her in the light of being like the great older sister that knew everything, but for me, she was always very critical of Phoebe in the way, like even in the first episode, you could see that she didn't like Phoebe, and I feel like she was way too judgmental for what she had going on. Another thing was she was very bossy, and she didn't really listen to her sisters much, which was kind of annoying because you all are like learning on your own and you all are going through it like together. So I don't see why her opinion was always taken as like face value versus the other sisters, because they were learning too, just as well as her. And it wasn't like that it came with, well, it did come with a handbook, but it didn't exactly teach them how to be great witches. This one, I think, was the biggest pet peeve for me, or thing about Prue, was she chose a man over her sister. Like the first episode, when Phoebe came home back to the manor, she was talking about how she didn't touch Roger. So who was Roger? Roger, Prue's ex-fiance. I guess that made an advance on Phoebe, and Prue didn't believe her sister, which is kind of weird. Like if y'all are as close as you said y'all were, or if you even like cared about her that much, you would have got her side of the story. Obviously Phoebe was problematic, but also if that was my sister and she said something like that, I of course would believe her over this dude. But I mean, some women are very, I don't know, I guess they just are more into their relationships than like family relationships, if that makes sense. She definitely was way overhyped. I mean, she was deserving of the hype, but she definitely was overhyped. In later seasons, Prue was no longer the older sister because she died, spoiler alert. And then Piper now taking on the role of the older sister. But in the beginning of the show, like in the first few seasons, she was very shy and just like, I don't know, as a younger sister, I guess, I don't think I see that. But I mean, as a middle sister, I feel like she was more of the problem solver, but also she didn't really stick up for herself when it came to her sisters, and I would have liked that more. I mean, there was a few times where she put Phoebe in her place, but for the most part, she was really just really quiet, and I didn't really see her purpose in the show. Of course, she had like that cooking thing going on, but they kind of dropped that out in later seasons, which would have been really good. So another one was the Dan and Leo thing, where she was in like a love triangle with Dan, who was her next door neighbor, and with Leo, who was like her white lighter guardian angel thing. And she, I mean, why was this such a hard choice to make? It's Leo, obviously. Why are you even playing? And assuming that she could, like, I know she wanted to have like a normal life, but that didn't really work out for her, and then she knew it wasn't going to work out until her attempting to was kind of like, it dragged on for a while because she went to Dan, went back to Leo, went to Dan, went back to Leo. And it was just like, just pick one, because honey, we don't have a lot of options here. Okay, so another thing with Piper's character was in later seasons, we know that she lost her sister, but she was way too uptight and hard ass. Like it just didn't go with her character of her being the shy, kind one, I think. Even though the loss of her sister obviously changed her a little bit, I just feel like they went kind of too far with Piper's character at one point, because she definitely wasn't open to having Paige as a younger sister at first. And she definitely was mean about it, and I think she would have been more open to having a younger sister, and she would have been more open to welcoming Paige into the family. But of course, they don't really have a lot of. I think the writers actually changed in later seasons, and I'm going to be talking about that too, because that was something that was annoying, because like the theme of the show also changed. But Piper, she was way too sarcastic, and it seemed like at times it was a little too much when she was always the one that was kind of like just in the middle, and so if she kept that, I feel like also the show in her direction went to her wanting kids and all. It could have been so much more than just her becoming a mom. She wanted to be a cook, and obviously she did at the end of the show. She was a chef, but I mean, that's what it was turned into. So we're getting to the younger sister, or the first younger sister, I guess, Phoebe, who when she initially like came into the show, she was very irresponsible. She was very irresponsible. She was erratic. Like, she did whatever she wanted to do. She didn't really have a concept of what responsibility was, and that was very problematic. And of course for her older sisters, because they were taking care of her, but I mean, that's for another time. She definitely was very boy crazy, which is understandable, but I feel like they overdid it too much in like later seasons. Because okay, so in the beginning, Phoebe was like, she wanted to be a witch, she wanted to do all of these things with her powers, she wanted to have an active power, and then all of a sudden in later episodes, like in later seasons close to the ending, she wanted to be a mom and all these things that just weren't very in character for Phoebe, or weren't like developmental to her actual storyline, which I feel like after the whole thing with Cole, which I will be talking about, she wasn't really open to that, and it should have been like a whole arc on being open to that instead of just throwing Coop in the middle like they did. But also, she left her sisters to go in the underworld with the demon boyfriend, and her sister died. Like, she definitely lost a lot of cool points, because your sisters are here battling something huge. Let this man go on and live his life and do what he was doing before he met you, because he has a lot of problems just like you. So I think y'all just need to split. Like, Phoebe and Cole were my OTP at one point when I was younger and didn't see like the toxicity of the relationship, but now that I am older and see like they just didn't work out, they didn't fit, and I don't know why it was pushed for so long. But her being boy crazy definitely took away from her charm as a witch, all pun intended, because she basically chose Cole over her sisters for a bunch of times. I feel like they all did actually, and it just didn't seem like they were very much sisters in those moments. So I guess my points have been kind of like not the sisters being problematic in themselves. It's just a lot of things that I found that were written. I just find a lot of things written wrong with the sisters in their storylines that weren't really in characters. Like, they were one thing and they were this, and it wasn't like character development where they grow and become different people. It was just plot there because someone else was writing their characters after a while. So of course we were introduced to the last younger sister, Paige, in season 4, and we didn't get a lot of backstory on her really. Her parents, or her foster parents or adoptive parents, they did die just like her biological parents, except for Sam. So that was kind of cool. It didn't make much sense to make Paige the younger sister, and I'm also going to talk about that, but she didn't get a lot of backstory. She said she had a drinking problem. We didn't see that again, even though she was always drinking at P3 or in other clubs. You could see her drinking. I guess they forgot that. She was also a social worker, and she quit her job, which was really dumb, because who's paying for that big old house that they all live in? I feel like if she kept her job, that would have given them like more innocent storylines to like go over and go through. She was way too eager to be like Prue, and I definitely feel like with the way Paige is, she wouldn't have wanted to be like Prue at all. I mean, she grew up on her own basically as an only child. Of course she wanted siblings, and of course she wanted to find out about the sisters, but she just didn't really give off the vibe that she wanted to be like them. The way the writers were writing it, they were kind of forcing it that she wanted to be this great witch like Prue, when I think she definitely would have been like Phoebe in the earlier seasons, where she wants to be a witch and wants to do her own thing. And they just wrote it into a big thing where she was trying to live up to Prue's shoes, when I think really Paige wouldn't have cared at all. Okay, so I think that's really it for like the specific character things that I kind of find problems with. And it's more so the storylines that were kind of unbelievable after like season 4, because there was a different writer. So in the beginning, there was a woman. She created the show based on herself and her 3 sisters. And so the show was about being witches and being sisters, or being sisters that just so happen to be witches. And then in the later seasons, as many people have said, the show became about being witches that just so happen to be sisters. And if that doesn't make sense, then I'm going to explain it to you as I go on. So Graham's dying was ultimately what led the sisters to find the book and to regain their powers. And that was fine and dandy, but she also talked about them being witches a lot. And in the show, she mentioned that she would do spells on them to make them forget, which is kind of like a plot hole, because in a bunch of episodes, it's like, what is her name? Detective Sheridan. Detective Sheridan was given like some kind of memory loss spell. She was given some memory loss spell and she forgot things, but she was still suspicious of the sisters. So the fact that the sisters were not suspicious of any kind of thing in their life was, I feel like, a big plot hole, or like a big mistake that they didn't address, because Grams was also casting spells on them as kids and making them forget things and not being aware of their powers. But also you have these detectives and these cops that, of course, they have files and everything. They're also suspicious of the sisters and almost got really close, but nothing happened. So with Grams dying, of course, that set some things off, but I feel like they could have done better in explaining how she was able to keep them not in the know, because I feel like one of them would have figured it out sooner or later. Okay, so another thing was a switch up of the girls' dad. So in the beginning, the girls had a dad who they were searching for, who they didn't really know, and then they came and had this dad. He came into one episode where the sisters were young and they didn't really want to talk to him, even though Phoebe had been searching for him. He didn't know how old she was. And then in later seasons, they recast the dad, and suddenly he was this great guy who was misunderstood and who Grams kept away from them. And it was very confusing. The switch was actually nice because I didn't even notice that they changed dad, but I just feel like that was very confusing. Like, was he there or was he not? How was Patty able to go ahead and cheat on him in such a small period of time? Because that would mean that Phoebe is way older than Paige, except for like 6 years, I guess 3 years. But then that brings me to another thing where Paige being the younger sister just didn't make sense. How are we all this certain age? And in the episode, that 70s episode, when they go back in time, Piper and Prue are clearly like 6 and 8 or 4 and 6, and Phoebe's not born yet. And Paige is not born yet, which doesn't make sense if they were all that close in age. So it would have made sense for Paige to be the long-lost older sister that was given away. And I think that definitely works in the new Charmed. I hate to say that because it has no connection to the old one. But it definitely does make sense to have made Paige the older sister. And I do think Rose McGowan being younger, I think she was actually older than Holly Marie Combs, who eventually played the older sister. So it just made more sense to have Paige as the older sister. But again, she was the younger sister. She lived in San Francisco. She never made any connection to her family until a few months before that. She always had an inkling, but she never approached the sisters or anything. It would have been cool for her to have had like encounters with Prue that we didn't see, and for her to talk about them, but of course the writers dropped the ball because they were too busy introducing unicorns and stuff like that. So the biggest thing was the witch whitelighter story, and of course that is how we know that Paige was conceived and given away, because Patty had an affair with her whitelighter Sam. But that doesn't make much sense if in that 70s episode again, in the first few seasons, Patty and Victor were broken up and she was still pregnant with Phoebe. So if they were already broken up and she was pregnant with Phoebe, did they get back together for Phoebe? And then she had an affair and they broke up again and she was pregnant with Paige. So that would have had to been within like a 3-year time span, and that just doesn't add up to me, or it doesn't make sense. So if anybody has the answer to that, then they can go ahead and answer that. But I do think that was a huge plot hole, and it was actually a cute kind of love story, and I wish we would have gotten more of Sam and Patty's backstory. but again, we didn't. I definitely feel like with the whole Piper and Leo witch white lighter thing, that it could have been kind of like their mom and Sam, where it was forbidden. I think the episodes were done pretty well, but also taking him, bringing him back, taking him, bringing him back. That just doesn't make sense when we're the people that are like fighting for you and you keep taking us and you keep taking the people that we love away from us. In later seasons, it seems like the elders are supposed to be like the high and mighty. They're supposed to be like the opposite of the source, but they can't vanquish the source, but the sisters can. Like, it just didn't make sense that they were the people that make the rules, yet they can't vanquish the source on their own, and the sisters can. Like, it just didn't add up, and I feel like I'm just realizing that now. Like, I'm blowing my mind. I guess they're supposed to be like all-knowing people that you go to, but if they make the rules, then shouldn't they be more powerful than the charmed ones? Like, so another big one was the sisters had no other family members that were brought into the show. It would have been really cool for them to have a boy cousin or a boy witch to... Okay, so the sisters having no other family members in the show kind of didn't make sense to me. Of course, their mom was an only child. Their Grams was supposed to have a brother of some kind, so he didn't have kids, I guess. Or Grams also saying that Wyatt was the first boy in the family, but looking at the family tree, she had to have had a brother in there somewhere. Like, they had no cousins. They had an aunt that I guess was Grams' like friend. That was their aunt. That also doesn't make sense. It just doesn't add up. They didn't really talk about that either, but the girls had nobody in their family. Like, it just goes down straight, and nobody got married or anything like that. It just doesn't make sense. I feel like when the sisters were dealing with that demon that made Prue die, that definitely was a really rookie mistake to have Phoebe go into the underworld during such a time like that, just to be searching for somebody for Cole to like be pardoned or whatever. I can't really remember the storyline of that, even though I've watched the show like 12 million times. I just think it was really a rookie mistake for them to all be separate when there's such a big demon on the loose, and then them exposing magic also made for a lot of trouble that I feel like could have been avoided if Piper and Prue hadn't done such a big thing like that. Out in the open, I feel like they knew that after 3 years of being witches that they were supposed to take precautions when vanquishing something like that. And I also feel like demons also don't present themselves in the earlier seasons as demons, and they weren't very much out in the open because they wanted to keep magic a secret just like everyone else. But of course, they didn't care in that instance. And it was a really great episode. It's one of my favorite like season ender episodes of any show, and I do think they did a great job. There's also much that doesn't make sense. Prue was the older sister and she died, but it just was a rookie mistake that didn't make much sense. So my favorite season actually has to be season 4 because it introduces Paige, and there's also kind of that dark undertone that is still there. Cole becomes the source of the underworld, or I guess you can say the devil, whatever you want to call him. And Phoebe becomes his queen, which I feel like she was very enticed by evil always as the youngest. But she left her sisters after something happening with her other sister that didn't make sense. And also, Cole was not himself. He was obviously being enticed and he was obviously possessed and taken over. So them kind of vanquishing him and seeing him as the evil didn't make sense if they could tell the difference between good and evil, which Cole definitely was. He didn't really have a choice. He was born half demon, half human, whatever. Which brings me to the baby that they conceived, which, like, it doesn't make sense that these two, Cole and Phoebe, were the ones to do the doom, but ultimately the baby was the sources and the seers. It doesn't make sense. I feel like it would still have Cole's DNA if I took biology class correctly, and if I passed them, which I did. It just doesn't make sense that all logic went out the window and that baby was basically the seer's baby. And then once they vanquished Cole, they still saw him as a problem, when really it was not his fault that he did all those things. It was the sources that basically enticed him to evil, and him being in the underworld and Phoebe seeing him, and he actually told her that the source was gone and he just wanted to get out of the, I guess it was like demon limbo. I forgot what that place was called, but he wanted to get out, and Phoebe basically wasn't listening to him and still blaming him, which of course she's going to have residual feelings and residual resentment, but she also didn't take into account that he was possessed. Another thing that I wish they had kept was the darker undertones and like a demon of the week from the earlier seasons. It really felt like they were just pulling things out of a hat to see what they could write about that week, especially with like the leprechauns and the fairies, which were also in season 1, but it just seemed more whimsical and fantasy versus like, it felt like another version of Buffy the Vampire Slayer in the beginning, which was really cool, but then it went to like way more peppy and light, and I don't know, I just feel like that kind of took away from the show, even though I do love like Paige's half. I feel like it could. And that was also attributed to another thing that was also really not done very well was in the beginning, good witches don't freeze. And we can see that by Piper being able to freeze certain people and not others, like her sisters and things like that. But then a few seasons later, there are people that are freezing Piper and Phoebe, but good witches don't freeze. So another one was witches using their powers for personal gain. I feel like that was very loosely written in the show all throughout, because of course Phoebe got in trouble a couple times for using her powers for personal gain. There was karma and some things backfired, but there were also demons that were doing things that were using their powers for personal gain and just doing things that didn't make sense. So does that only apply to witches, or does it apply to demons, or just does it apply to anyone? But that's like a rule of thumb to do. Like, they weren't really clear on that, and I feel like they changed the rules up as the show went. My understanding was that white lighters were guardian angels that watch over you and keep you safe and guide you. But then in a couple seasons, they introduced actual guardian angels. So what are white lighters? So do you get both? Or the biggest one and the final one was Prue died and she disappeared, and they can't interact or talk with her even though they can talk to ghosts. Even though Grams, like in season 1, Grams had died like a few weeks before or a few months before, but they were able to talk to her, but they were never able to talk to Prue. And I know due to technicalities, they weren't allowed to basically use Shannon Doherty's likeness or anything like that, but it still would have been nice for them to like see her back or something, talking to her, or just recast her. They could have recast Prue. It would have been fine. You know, some things happen. Actresses are recast all the time. And I feel like Jennifer Love Hewitt or Tiffany Thiessen, I think they were thinking of those two to play Paige. They could have definitely taken over the role as the older sister. And that's just all I have to say on that. I think that is the end of my spiel. I couldn't really find many more things because this is one of my favorite TV shows. But if you do have some things that you found wrong with Charmed, go ahead and comment those down below. And if there's another TV show I can talk about, because I have plenty of problems with plenty, like The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina, go ahead and tell me that too, and I'll see you next video.